night Elvis died, I grabbed a notebook with shaking hands because I knew I could never tell the world what I'd just seen inside Graceland if I didn't write it down immediately. There were places in that house no fan has ever walked. Doors even closed friends were warned not to open. And I was there. What I witnessed in those hidden spaces completely changed how I saw Elvis in his final days. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why those rooms are still locked and what his ex-fiancée says really happened behind those doors. For years, fans have walked through Graceland thinking they'd seen it all. The glittering jumpsuits, the gold records, the famous jungle room. But what if the real story was happening in places no one ever put on a tour map? This episode isn't just another retelling of Elvis Presley's life. It's about the quiet, hidden corners of his world that only one woman was invited into, and the memories she's carried in silence for decades. We're going to step as close as we possibly can to those locked doors without fully opening them yet. Now, after all this time, Elvis's ex-fiancée, Ginger Alden, is finally ready to talk about what it was really like to share his most private moments inside Graceland. Not in the rooms you've seen in photos or documentaries, but in spaces the public has never been allowed to set foot in. Spaces that still feel frozen in the exact moment his life changed forever. Through her eyes, we'll follow the trail of a young woman suddenly swept into the orbit of the world's biggest star, finding herself not just in his arms, but in the most guarded parts of his home. In this video, you'll discover how an intense, whirlwind love story pulled Ginger past the velvet ropes and into Elvis's inner world, the side of his life that existed far away from cameras, crowds, and carefully staged images. You'll get a rare look at the unseen Graceland he lived in when the lights were off, and the emotional truth behind that sealed upper floor and the so-called secret rooms that remain untouched to this day. Don't click away. Her final reveal about those rooms is something even lifelong Elvis fans rarely hear. Before she ever walked through the doors of Graceland as Elvis's fiancée, Ginger Alden was just a little girl growing up in a disciplined, ordinary-seeming military family. Born in 1956, she was raised under the steady gaze of a father who worked in Army public relations, a world where image, duty, and composure mattered. At home, life wasn't about red carpets or screaming fans. It was about structure, respect, and learning how to present yourself with poise, even when the spotlight felt just a bit too bright. As she got older, that poise turned into a kind of quiet grace. Ginger entered beauty pageants and stepped into modeling, learning how to stand tall under the lights, smile on cue, and project confidence even when her heart was pounding. Those experiences taught her how to handle attention, but nothing in those early years, no runway, no stage, no pageant crown, could have prepared her for the level of fame she would eventually brush up against. Long before anyone called her Elvis's fiancée, she was just a young woman trying to navigate a life that was slowly, unknowingly circling closer to his. What makes her story even more haunting is that she actually met Elvis when she was just 5 years old, with no idea that their paths would collide again in a way that would change her life forever. She didn't come into his world as a fan chasing a fantasy after his death. She lived inside it while he was still there. She sat beside him, listened to him, and shared his most private days and nights inside Graceland. So when she talks about what really happened in those final months and in those hidden parts of the house most people never see, she's not speaking as an outsider looking in. She's speaking as someone who was already on the inside when everything began to unravel. When Ginger was 20, life was supposed to be simple. Modeling jobs, time with her sisters, and the usual dreams of a young woman in the 1970s. Then came the invitation that quietly changed everything. A visit to Graceland, not as a tourist, but as a guest. It was shortly after Elvis's breakup with Linda Thompson, a moment when his world was shifting and the people around him weren't quite sure what would come next. Ginger walked into that mansion with her sisters, not knowing that this visit would pull her straight into the center of a storm. One that blended romance, pressure, and a level of scrutiny most people can't imagine. The relationship that followed didn't unfold slowly and cautiously. It took off like a jet. Within just 2 months, Elvis proposed, placing on her finger a diamond that had once been part of his famous TCB stage ring, a symbol fans knew well, now turned into something deeply personal. Plans were set for a Christmas Day wedding in 1977, a fairy tale date on the calendar that made it feel like the universe itself was wrapping their love in a bow. For Ginger, it truly felt like a once-in-a-lifetime love story, intense, overwhelming, and almost unreal, as if she'd stepped out of her own life and into someone else's legend. But behind the magic, there were cracks forming. Elvis's inner circle, the so-called Memphis Mafia, didn't see her as one of them. She didn't fit the familiar pattern, didn't slide neatly into the role they thought the woman beside Elvis should play, and their doubts hung in the air like smoke. Even Vernon Presley, Elvis's own father, worried his son might not be as sure as he seemed. While the people around him whispered, questioned, and quietly argued over whether she truly belonged, something very different was happening between Elvis and Ginger. He was opening doors for her, not just to his heart, but to parts of his life in his home that almost no one else had ever been allowed to see. By the summer of 1977, rumors were already swirling about Elvis Presley, his health, his habits, his moods. But inside Graceland, Ginger was living a reality that didn't fit neatly into the headlines. All of it built toward that terrible morning on August 16, 1977, when she walked down the hall and opened a door that would change her life forever. She was the one who found him unresponsive in the bathroom, the one who cried out for help in a house that suddenly felt too quiet, too heavy. The world only heard the blunt version, a shocking, messy, lonely death of a fallen icon. But the story Ginger tells from inside those walls is anything but simple. In her memories, Elvis wasn't a man who had given up. He was talking about the future. She says he was making plans, talking about getting healthier, returning to the stage, finding a way to reclaim the best parts of himself. Yet those hopeful moments were tangled with episodes that were far from picture perfect. She remembers bursts of anger, like the night he fired a gun at a TV that dared show something he didn't want to see, or the time he hurled food in frustration during a painful conversation about his weight. She recalls a moment that still stings, when he struck her in anger, and then begged for forgiveness. These weren't tabloid snapshots. They were raw, private moments between two people behind a locked gate where the cameras never followed. That's where the real conflict lives. The public clung to the legend, the jumpsuits, the scandals, while Ginger watched the man behind all of that slowly unravel in the very place he called home. The world saw Elvis Presley, the myth. Ginger saw the person who lived behind closed doors. Doors that, in time, would be shut not just emotionally, but physically. Because after that day, Graceland wouldn't just be a mansion, it would become a carefully controlled shrine, with entire sections of the house quietly moved beyond the reach of the world. And those closed doors weren't just emotional. In Graceland, entire sections of the house would soon become completely off limits to the world. In the days after Elvis's death, Graceland shifted from a private sanctuary into something almost surreal. Lines of grieving fans stretched outside the gates, clutching flowers, photos, and memories as they slowly moved toward the house they'd only ever seen from a distance. Inside, the man who had once filled those rooms with music and late-night laughter lay in state for a public viewing before a more intimate, private funeral took place within the mansion's walls. Soon, the quiet meditation garden on the grounds became his final resting place, a peaceful corner where he would lie beside his parents, his grandmother, and years later, even his own grandson. The home that had once echoed with life now carried the weight of loss in every corner. For a brief time, Elvis's father, Vernon Presley, tried to carry the responsibility of his son's legacy in this massive, expensive home. But his health was failing, and grief weighed heavily on him. Before long, the responsibility passed to Priscilla, who suddenly found herself making decisions not just for herself, but for their young daughter, Lisa Marie. Graceland wasn't just a family home anymore. It was a financial burden, burning through hundreds of thousands of dollars a year just to keep the lights on and the property intact. Serious conversations began. Should they sell? Could they really hold on to this place that was both a memory and a money pit? Then came the bold, risky decision that would change everything. Instead of letting Graceland slip away, they chose to open it to the world. In 1982, the gates didn't just guard a private estate anymore. They welcomed paying visitors. The house transformed into a museum, a living tribute where fans could walk the same floors Elvis once did. The gamble paid off. Graceland became a massive tourist destination, a pilgrimage site for people from every corner of the globe who wanted to feel just a little closer to the king. But even as millions filed through the halls, stared at the costumes, and stood in hushed awe in the meditation garden, there was one part of this famous mansion they were never allowed to enter, a place that remained firmly, deliberately off limits. If you've ever taken the Graceland tour, you know how it feels to follow that slow-moving river of people through Elvis's world. You shuffle past the gleaming trophies, pause in front of walls lined with gold records, and step into rooms that feel frozen in the glow of the 1970s. The famous Jungle Room, with its shag carpet and carved furniture, almost feels like a movie set brought to life. You see the kitchen, the living areas, the places where family and friends once gathered. And then, just when you feel like you've seen the heart of the house, the tour guides lead you to one particular spot that quietly changes everything: the staircase. There, at the bottom of those stairs, the tour stops. The guide's voice softens as they explain what lies beyond the roped-off steps. Up there is the second floor, Elvis Presley's private sanctuary. His bedroom, his dressing areas, and the bathroom where his life came to an end are all still there, untouched by tourists and cameras. The official reason is simple but powerful. Opening those rooms would risk turning the story of his life into a spectacle of his death, shifting the focus from the man he was to the moment he was lost. And so, out of respect, the second floor remains sealed to the public, a part of Graceland that exists more as legend than reality. Only a handful of people have been allowed up there since Elvis passed: his daughter, Lisa Marie, a few trusted staff members, and, for a brief moment in time, actor Nicolas Cage. To almost everyone else, that staircase might as well be a wall. But before those doors were locked and the second floor became sacred, off-limits ground, one person walked those halls freely: Elvis's fiancée. She sat in those rooms, listened to his late-night conversations, and saw the king at his most unguarded, when the world wasn't watching. And it's in those hidden spaces, behind those unseen doors, that some of her most shocking memories were born. When Ginger talks about the upstairs at Graceland, she isn't reciting a tour script. She's reaching back into her own memories. In her mind, those rooms aren't museum pieces. They're snapshots of a life being lived in real time. The second floor wasn't polished for cameras or arranged to impress strangers. It was functional and personal, a place where Elvis moved through his routines, wrestled with his thoughts, and tried to hold on to some sense of normalcy while the rest of the world treated him like a myth. Every hallway, every doorway, felt less like part of a mansion and more like part of a private world only a few were ever allowed to enter. Through Ginger's eyes, those rooms revealed a man pulled in two directions. On one side, there was Elvis Presley, the global icon expected to be larger than life every time he stepped onto a stage or appeared in public. On the other, there was a tired, vulnerable human being trying to manage his health, his pressure, and the chaos swirling around him. She remembers the quiet evidence of his attempts to stay in control: medications laid out, little rituals and habits he clung to, small symbols of faith that hinted at a man still hoping for a comeback, still believing he could turn things around. While fans downstairs marveled at flashy outfits and gold records, the upstairs held the quieter reality of what it cost to be that famous for that long. What struck Ginger most wasn't just what she saw, but how it felt to be there. Walking into those rooms was, for her, like stepping directly into Elvis's mind, into his hopes, his fears, his secrets, all wrapped up in spaces that now feel almost frozen in time. The contrast between the glamorous, public downstairs and the intimate, almost untouched atmosphere upstairs was impossible to ignore. And that's why, when she speaks about those second-floor rooms today, she isn't just describing furniture or layout. She's describing the Elvis she knew, the one the world will never tour through an audio guide, no matter how many times they walk past that roped-off staircase. When Lisa Marie Presley grew up and inherited Graceland, She didn't see the second floor as a potential attraction or a missing stop on the tour. To her, those rooms were a direct, intimate line to her father, the last place where his presence still felt untouched by flashbulbs and ticket sales. Keeping that part of the house closed wasn't just a business decision, it was an act of protection. By locking those doors, she made sure that at least one part of Elvis's world would remain personal, sacred, and reserved for the family who knew him as Daddy, not as a headline. That choice means that, for the public, Elvis's story is intentionally left a little incomplete. Fans can walk through the rooms where he entertained guests, recorded music, and played out the more public chapters of his life, but the final pages are missing from the tour. There will always be a sense that something is just out of reach, a part of the narrative that can't be photographed, filmed, or neatly explained. And in a way, that gap forces us to remember that Elvis wasn't just a character in our collective imagination. There are pieces of his life that were never meant to be consumed, only remembered by the few who were actually there. That's where Ginger's voice becomes so important. Through her book and carefully chosen interviews, she cracks the door open just enough for us to sense what those upstairs rooms meant, without stripping them of their mystery. Her memories form one of the only bridges between the Graceland tourists see, the one polished for visitors, and the Graceland she actually lived in with him. When she speaks about those spaces, she's not just talking about hidden objects or private layouts. She's talking about the fragile, human side of the king, the part that still exists behind closed doors, protected from the world, and revealed only in glimpses to those willing to listen closely. Over the years, Graceland has been many things: a warm, chaotic family home, a carefully curated museum, even the center of legal battles and wild claims about money, ownership, and legacy. Yet through all of that noise, the true heart of the property has stayed strangely untouched. While tour routes have expanded, exhibits have changed, and new attractions have been added, those upstairs rooms remain exactly where they have always been, out of reach. In a world that seems determined to monetize every last detail, it's almost shocking that this one part of Elvis's world has been allowed to stay quiet. That's why the idea of secret rooms leaves people genuinely speechless. It's not about some over-the-top conspiracy or hidden treasure in the walls. It's about the fact that these spaces hold the last unedited chapter of Elvis Presley's life. No tour guide, no camera crew, no souvenir stand has ever rewritten what's up there. Through Ginger's memories, we're reminded that behind the legend was a man trying to juggle fame and exhaustion, applause and loneliness, chaos and a desperate search for love, control, and peace. Her recollections don't solve the mystery of those rooms. They deepen it, giving us just enough to feel the weight of what's been left unseen. So now the question lands in your hands. Do you think Graceland should ever open the second floor to the public? Should Elvis's most private rooms stay locked forever, or is it finally time for fans to see the part of his world that's been kept in the shadows? Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm really curious where you stand on this. And if you want to keep exploring the untold sides of Elvis and Graceland, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click on the next Elvis story waiting for you right here.